World Crisis Radio. Now, in the midst of this active political season of primary elections, and with everybody looking forward to the congressional vote in November, we want to go to Nebraska. And, of course, everybody who's been watching these primaries, especially on the Republican side, is aware of a new Republican golden boy, Ben Sasse. He's actually a liberal Republican. You can see it from his resume, but as a demagogue, he's decided to disguise himself as a member of the Tea Party. So he's spouting the usual reactionary stuff, even though he's really a big government internationalist, I'm sure, in his own way. But the news is not Sasse. The news is that even though the Democratic Party has apparently decided not to commit much in the way of resources to stopping Sasse, that would be the Democratic candidate Domina, there is a third choice, and that's the one we're interested in. It's the Tax Wall Street Party, and it's Dan Buhrdorf, very fine candidate, lifelong Nebraskan as far as I know, operating out of Lincoln, and Dan is with us today, so we want you to get to know him because he's going to be one of the important wild cards here in the November election. Dan, welcome.
Thanks very much, Webster. Thank you very much.
We're delighted to have you. Now, why don't you start? You want to start with telling us the situation there in terms of Sasse and Domina and what you plan to do, and then we want to hear something about you.
Well, sure. I want to talk about my platform, and but the basic background is that we have a Wall Street candidate named Sasse, and we've got two parties in Nebraska. We have the Conservative Party and the Reactionary Party. That's the Democrats and the Republicans, and the Democrats in Nebraska are notoriously weak. I think that's fair to say, and they're running kind of like a third party. And that's what we're looking at. We've got big pockets for both parties. I mean, maybe Sasse might have, at this point, maybe 5 times, 10 times as much money as a Democrat, but we're talking like a lot of money for both. And the Democratic candidate is a lawyer, and he's got a lot of lawyer friends in Omaha. And of course, Sasse is backed by, Koch money, by all kinds of conservative groups. You can go to the FEC and look at that yourselves. I'd encourage you to do that. And
I think it's Americans for Prosperity, Tea Party Patriots. So
the list goes on and on.
Koch groups.
You bet.
And some others.
And I'm a fifth-generation Nebraskan, and I was born and raised in Lincoln, and I graduated from the University of Nebraska, and I'm running for U.S. Senate in Nebraska as the Tax Wall Street Party candidate for senator. And I'm proud to bring a platform of economic development back to my home state and to the people of Nebraska. And I'd really encourage people, please check out my platform at danfornebraska.com. This is a winning program, a winning platform, and I'm asking the good people listening to fight with me. Webster, I got to tell you something. 1 out of every 5 hamburgers is grown in the state of Nebraska. 1 out of every 5 packages of beef you buy at the store comes from a Nebraska ranch. And it's my job to protect our farmers and ranchers from Wall Street cartels and Wall Street predators. They've got these ranchers and farmers growing food at less than it costs to produce the food, and that just can't continue. They have to be paid at least the cost of growing the food, and that's what I'm shooting for, and that's what groups like the Nebraska Farmers Union here support. And I've got to get this message out to them and to Nebraska. So come join this fight with me by first visiting my website at danfornebraska.com and go to Dan for Nebraska on Facebook and like my page there, and follow me at Dan for Nebraska on Twitter. Your listeners, I know, are familiar with the American Society of Civil Engineers estimate that we need to invest about $4 trillion into infrastructure over the next 10 years and get our roads and bridges and trains up to standard. But I think we need to do more than that to get to the 21st century infrastructure in America. I want to see high-speed rail from New York to Los Angeles going right through Lincoln and Omaha, So imagine these families separated from their kids on the coast and being able to see them in just a few hours. Imagine someone being able to go to a cultural event in Chicago or Denver in less time than it takes now, or a business meeting in Kansas City. I think we can have world-class infrastructure if we make the Fed stop bailing out banks and start bailing out America. And we can pay for it with the Fed using long-term interest-free credit. And I love the idea of this peace race. That's one of my platforms on danfornebraska.com. I love the idea of outproducing China in high energy, high-tech energy, or high-tech transportation. So we need a modern 21st century transportation system and a modern 21st century infrastructure. So let's take the Federal Reserve under the control of Congress, make the Federal Reserve act like a national bank, and start repairs and major new projects coast to coast to bring high-paying, high-value jobs to American workers and companies. And again, you can see all of this at danfornebraska.com. And if your listeners would
Tremendous.
Yeah, thank you very much. If your listeners would check that out, please. I have a short piece on my website. It's called the U.S. Postal Service. It's about the U.S. Postal Service. It's in the news section. It's called Going Down the Line, and where I talk about the need to save the post office from the poison pill Denny Hastert stuck in it before he left office. This is in the news section on my webpage, danfornebraska.com. Now, the post office and rural delivery is very important to the people of Nebraska, and I would like to raise this issue with your listeners as a service to the people of Nebraska, if I may. The Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act of 2006, that makes the Postal Service prepay 7 years of pension obligations every single year. So over the course of 10 years, it requires the post office to pay the pensions on people who haven't even been born yet. Rural delivery is essential to Nebraskans, so I want to say there will be no privatization of the Postal Service. There will be no farming out of postal services. We will keep six-day delivery to our hardworking rural communities, and as Senator, I'll fight to make sure of that. Okay?
That's great. I mean, what I'm hearing is the plan from Hastert, of course, was to so weaken the Postal Service that it could be privatized and the union could be busted. But in the meantime, rural America would get the shaft, because without cheap and effective and very economical on a world scale, the largest enterprise in the world is the Postal Service, largest company. And without that, rural America would be an economic disaster area, because you wouldn't be able to have a business in a rural area taking advantage of the low rents and other economies. You got to have the Postal Service to do that.
Right.
Fantastic. All right, hang on one second. We'll be back for another segment here on World Crisis Radio.
Thanks very much.
With Dan Buhrdorf. I can hear it, the next senator from the great state of Nebraska. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C., and we're so happy to be talking to Dan Buhrdorf, a contender for the United States Senate on the Tax Wall Street Party ticket in the state of Nebraska. His website is danfornebraska.com.
danfornebraska.com. Thank you very much.
danfornebraska.com. And what Dan just went through in the earlier segment is he's talking about parity prices for farmers to stop the looting and the sacking of the farm sector. The second point was modern infrastructure so that you can maximize all your efficiencies, right? To get farm products to market, they've got to go over land on a railroad, and that better be a high-speed rail or better. The peace race internationally, and then saving the Postal Service and saving the Postal Union from Denny Hastert. And Denny Hastert, of course, is still here. He's a very powerful lobbyist, right? A lot of people don't know that, but he's still cashing in from his crimes as the Speaker of the House back under Bush. Dan, what strikes me is that you, with this is the American system as we used to know it. And of course, Nebraska is a glorious chapter in that famous meeting of the Populist Party in Omaha in, 1890. that really set the stage for the New Deal and everything good that happened in the 20th century.
Sure. It planted the seeds for the whole Democratic Party, and I think the Democrats have lost their way a little bit, and maybe Tax Wall Street Party can bring them back in line. I certainly hope so. Webster, I was a teacher and a principal before I started doing this, before moving back to Nebraska, and everybody nowadays talks about the cost of higher education going up. It's gone up 500% since 1999. I can't even almost say it. 500% since 1999. And the Los Angeles Times article, they had an article this Monday, May 19th, and it pointed out that college prices have gone up in part because states can't subsidize student tuition like they used to. So we can also say that universities took a huge beating in the derivative losses, so that's a big problem. And my plan is to back the Elizabeth Warren bill, Bank on Students. You familiar with that? It's the force.
Give us a quick summary for those who are new to the program.
Well, sure. What it would do is force the Federal Reserve to refinance federal student loans at 0.75%. And I'm also going to tax Wall Street with a Wall Street sales tax and use that revenue to, one, stop the derivative trading. So they say that the power to tax is the power to destroy. So let's use power to destroy derivatives, the cause of the financial crisis we're in. Yes, go ahead.
It can be. It can be the power to destroy. And when it comes to derivatives, that can't come soon enough.
Right. So let's take it. Let's use that power to destroy derivative trading. And secondly, I want to use that Wall Street sales tax to rebuild these state budgets and take some pressure off these kids and parents. So if you go to danfornebraska.com, you'll see that I'm also fighting for a Medicare for all, and I support the H.R. 676. That's H.R. 676. It's the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All Act. Now, I personally know this type of health care works because I've seen it in other countries, and it's very popular and very effective. And I support the idea of paying for Medicare for all with a small fee of maybe $100 per person per month, so the current users of Medicare won't lose anything. If someone couldn't afford it, we can use the Wall Street sales tax to help them out. So we want to tax Wall Street, not Main Street, in that Wall Street needs to pay their fair share with a small sales tax.
And, of course, right now Wall Street pays nothing, right? Most of those banks pay no corporate income tax, and they pay no... There is a turnover tax which finances the Securities and Exchange Commission, but it's 0.0005 or something like that, right?
Sure, it's minuscule. They don't even feel it, and there's a reason for that. And I know a lot of your listeners might come from industrial parts of the U.S. where good jobs are hard to find, and I want to tell you listeners that I'm the only growth candidate in Nebraska, and I would be the growth senator in Washington. And I want to protect American industry and American farms and our Nebraska farms because free trade, Webster, free trade has failed.
Free trade has failed.
To begin making the switch to a system that works and can sustain generations of Americans for years to come.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of the race there, right, Ben Sasse would be the favorite. And from what I understand, the main thing with him is he wants to outdo himself with rhetorical flourishes, how much he hates the Affordable Care Act. He hates it. He detests it. He wants to destroy it. And that's obviously not good enough in a depression. You need to have some answers, not just a list of what you hate.
Right, and I think that a Medicare for all would give people the answers they need. So there you move away from the problems of Obamacare and the problems of the market-based insurance with the private healthcare companies rationing care, and you move into something that has proven it works. It's one of the most popular programs in the U.S., and it's proven it works. So I want to make something there for Americans that they can count on. And I also want Americans to count on that we need to get away from these crippling free trade agreements and that are sucking our jobs and businesses and production away to low-wage countries. And we can do that by renegotiating and putting back a reasonable small trading tax with our trading partners. And
right, and I think we could also consider some kind of a tariff, right, a 10% or 15%.
That's what I'm talking about, like this small tax, and we can do it. We don't have to. We're not talking about a trade war. We're talking about negotiating in a very orderly fashion, and negotiating with our best trading partners and with the countries of goodwill around the world, and bringing back this idea that everyone has the right, every country has the right to support their own industries and to build their economies. I mean, it's just reasonable.
They have the right, they have the responsibility also. So right. The website is danfornebraska.com, Dan for Nebraska. If you go there, there's a way you can contribute money. You can volunteer your time. This is a grassroots effort. It's not the millions of dollars coming from the Koch brothers or Soros or any of them.
That's correct. And I thank you very much for bringing that up, Webster. That's very kind of you. An army marches on its stomach, as we say. So danfornebraska.com is my website. You can also like me on Facebook, like this program on Facebook, Dan for Nebraska on Facebook, Dan for Nebraska on Twitter.
Follow Dan, right? Start following
right.
So you keep up with this. This is going to be the most interesting campaign. Look, concerning Sass, when Sass won his primary there, right, against those other two Republicans,
sure.
There was an article, sort of a puff piece in the New York Times. There are a couple of things about it. Let me just mention two things. One is one of your local blogs there in Nebraska said that Sass, at the beginning of his campaign, maybe he was unguarded, he started saying, oh, I was the interface of the FBI, the CIA, and the Department of Justice.
Right.
So he's a top intelligence spook. That's one thing you might comment on. The second thing is a woman wrote in saying, oh, I knew him in high school. This guy Sass, 20 or more years ago, Sass was running around telling people he was going to be the 45th president of the United States running as a Republican. And this woman writing in says that this was corroborated by a friend of hers who told her that when Sass got to Harvard, right, because he's got this big elitist resume, that at Harvard Sass was touting himself as the 45th president. Well, right now, Obama's 44, so there's still a chance to be 45.
Right. So Sass has a case of insider denier. Yeah, but you can go to danfornebraska.com to learn more about my campaign.
Hang on one second. Let me just get your answer to that, and then we'll let you go in the beginning of the next segment here.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Just a couple of more minutes with Dan Buhrdorf out in Nebraska. Dan, probably the most interesting candidate for the United States Senate in the current cycle, challenging the liberal Republican golden boy, Ben Sass, with his fantastic resume. Sass claiming that he was the interface of CIA, FBI, and DOJ, a spook of the highest level, and somebody who has been touting himself as the 45th president of the United States for the past 20 to 25 years, as far as we can tell. What do you make of all that?
Well, I think what those articles you're referring to is on Nebraska Watchdog. Dina Winner wrote up some interesting biographies about him at the beginning of the race, like you said, last summer, and it really touts his connections with the big government jobs and very big corporations. Dr. Ben Sass, he's a doctor. He's a president of a university, and I think he might be the only president of a university to actually call for people not to go to college. I think he's against higher education. I think he's come out on that. But Dr. Ben Sass is the anointed one in the race, that's for sure. And I'm sure that you know it sounds like that he is the Club for Growth candidate, and he's the insider denier. I think you can call him the insider denier because he denies his tremendous government and elite corporate resume. And he worked for Bain Capital, that's the same company where Benjamin Netanyahu met his lifelong pal Mitt Romney. And Dr. Sass also worked for the McKinsey and Company, that's where Chelsea Clinton worked. So
international consulting firm and
sure.
influence peddling.
Right. And you can see that these are really elite institutions. And what's strangest of all is that Dr. Sass, he has this, he consistently plays down his prestigious government jobs as like you said, the liaison between the FBI and the CIA.
And the DOJ.
And because I think
three ways.
If I'm right with this Nebraska Watchdog article, it says that he was number 2 man at DOJ at the time. He also doesn't like to mention.
Well, maybe you're right. Anyway.
He also doesn't like to mention he was the number 4 man in the Department of Health and Human Services, and that also came out in these Nebraska Watchdog articles. So,
right.
Yeah, it is strange, very strange.
There's a lot of material there, but Dan, why don't you come back next week and let's go through a little bit more about SAS, because there's some darker aspects that I'm afraid we may have to deal with. But I think that's enough for this time around. Dan4Nebraska.com, Dan4Nebraska.com. Great place to spend a week in the summer campaigning.
Yeah.
You're gathering signatures right now. How long does that go on?
We have till August 1st. We have to turn in around 6,000 signatures. So we're working really hard. We're gathering team up to go out to all the big populated areas and events. So wish us luck. We'll need it.
Okay, we wish you luck. And
thank you very much.
If you want to spend a World Historical Week in Nebraska, now you know what to do. Right out there in Middle America, in the sunshine, in the cornfields, and on the stump.
And
we'll see you soon, Dan. More power to you. Thanks for everything.
Thank you very much, Webster. Bye-bye.
So we just have a couple of minutes left. Let's just say a few things about the European parliament. Actually, before that, notice in Libya, the person who wants to drive out the parliament and seize control of the government is Khalifa Haftar of the CIA. He lived in McLean, Virginia all those years. He was sent over in 2011. General Yunus, a Gaddafi veteran, had taken over the rebel military, and General Yunus was assassinated by that February Martyrs Brigade, who was then supposed to provide the security in Benghazi when Ambassador Stevens got killed. So Khalifa Haftar is right in the middle of the CIA plotting in Libya 2011-2012. And remember, Benghazi was an October surprise by General Petraeus and others designed to get Obama out and Romney in. And it might have been Vice President Petraeus before you knew it. Now, the European election, the bottom line, vote for Tsipras, vote for Alexis Tsipras. Here's what we know. According to the Washington Post today, the only candidate that the bankers fear is indeed Alexis Tsipras. All these other people, Farage, Le Pen, Wilders, Grillo, Alternative für Deutschland, these are all fakers. These are all wretched figures. They're not anti-system. They're not an alternative. They're not a critique of the system. They are the essentially the reserve army. With Tsipras, you get somebody who the bankers are sincerely concerned about, and he's going to offer you an anti-austerity vote, anti-austerity protest vote, plus the idea of a debt conference, which could be used then to write down derivatives, because that's the main form of debt that Europe is afflicted with. So that's why Tsipras is the best. Now, some of this stuff gets quite grotesque. The Green Party, their right-wing, pro-austerity, pro-financier, and warmonger stance. In one of those debates, we had the question of sanctions against Russia come up. Ska Keller, the unfortunate candidate of the Greens, piped up in favor of sanctions against Russia, as Tsipras was concluding that this stuff was bad for Europe. In the case of Grillo has now gone into the wild blue yonder of pure insanity. Grillo has threatened essentially the mafia elimination of the Italian Prime Minister Renzi. We know Renzi. Renzi is a neoliberal banker's boy installed there by De Benedetti and Soros and so forth. But Grillo comes out and threatens him with the Lupara Bianca, the white shotgun, I guess it means, but it essentially means that you're going to disappear and never be found. I guess an equivalent would be you're going to get a cement overcoat and nothing will ever be heard from you. You're going to sleep with the fishes, in other words. Grillo says that Grillo, is beyond Hitler, although he also says that he came on the Bruno Vespa show on Italian television this week to prove to older Italian voters who might be disillusioned with Berlusconi, who's doing his community service right now, that that maybe they could vote for Grillo. I would urge them, don't do it. Grillo is promising chaos, delirium, and essentially the end of the world. And notice the Grillo formula. He attacks politicians. He says politicians are corrupt and they should go home. Yeah, what about bankers, Grillo? What about the people who actually control and dominate the system? This is the so-called qualunquismo, this pujadisme, very crude, stupid, racist, reactionary, low-level stuff that we get from Grillo. And anyway, the point is that the bankers are afraid of Tsipras, but they're not afraid of Grillo. Grillo was endorsed by Goldman Sachs. Farage is an ex-stockbroker of the City of London. The same goes for the rest of them. Right? They're all cut from the same cloth. The word now, France 24 is reporting that the early returns, I guess, from the Netherlands, because this voting has started already in the last day or two, the early returns from the Netherlands indicate that Wilders has come in fourth. Now, it's expected that the two leading parties will be the Junkers of Luxembourg. That's the Christian Democrats, Popular Party, and the rest of them, Merkel, Rajoy, and so forth. And then on the other side, the Social Democrats with Schultz. The big question is who comes in third? It's quite possible that Tsipras could come in third and not Verhofstadt of the European liberals. So go out and vote for Tsipras. Go Tsipras. And don't vote for those right-wing Greens. They're insufferable. No to Keller, no to Jose Bob. And we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio.